Shalom. This week we are reading Parashat Vayera, and in it, in chapter 22 of the book of Bereshit, we read about the Akedah, the incident of the binding of Isaac, considered to be the 10th and the greatest test in the career of our forefather Avraham. And there's a tradition that Avraham was tested by Hashem himself 10 times. Interestingly, this is actually the only one of them in the Torah that the words are actually told to us that Hashem tested Avraham. And the Akedah, as it's become known as, the binding of Isaac, is a symbol really for all generations. Akedat Yitzchak, the Akedah. The binding of Isaac is a watershed event, not only in the life of Avraham, but actually in Jewish consciousness for all time. This whole idea of the terrible ordeal that Avraham was subjected to, the test of his love, of his faith in Hashem, and it's mentioned in many instances throughout the liturgy of the Jewish people. There's a prayer that we say in the Slichot, in the special supplications, the one who answered Avraham in Mount Moriah, he will answer us. There's an expression about how we ask God to look upon and remember the ashes of Yitzchak, that according to the rather mystical interpretation that indeed Yitzchak actually did die on the altar and was burnt by the fire and came back to life. And then, of course, when we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, one of the main reasons, one of the major symbolic ideas that is invoked by the shofar is the ram that Avraham substituted, that was caught in the thicket by its horn. Avraham substituted instead of Yitzchak, and indeed there's a statement that our sages make. Why do we blow the shofar of the ram? And Hashem says, in order for me to remember for you the binding of Yitzchak, the son of Avraham, and I will consider it as if all of you have bound yourselves before me. This according to the Midrash. So there is an idea of the Akedah, of the binding of Yitzchak becoming some sort of transcendent experience for every subsequent generation. Indeed, there is a statement made in the Psikta that Yitzchak is called Rosh LaNekadim. He is called the head of, the first of all those that were bound. And indeed, there is a tradition, there is a history in the very body of Israel and the Jewish people of sacrifice to this extent of laying down our lives for our belief in the God of Israel. Now, this portion, I think, has been so sanctified in the annals of Jewish history and is so much emphasized in the consciousness of the Jewish people, not only because of the one-time incident of the binding of Isaac, but because the attribute of self-sacrifice throughout the ages, which is the whole backdrop of this test, is part of the legacy that our forefather Avraham bequeathed to all of his children. But when we think about it, we really can consider it and ask ourselves, what really was the test? Avraham, man of great faith, some people have pointed out that the very test was the fact that he knew very well that Hashem, the God of Israel, abhorred human sacrifice, and that this is what he spent his whole life teaching against. And others point out that it couldn't really have been much of a test at all because his entire character trait was this tremendous depth of love to fulfill Hashem's will. And actually, other people, they point out, they ask, what kind of a test was it really, when indeed he really didn't have to go through with it? He bound Isaac, yes, but he did not have to go through with it. Indeed, there is a very enigmatic and moving conversation that is recorded in the Talmud to have taken place between, as it were, Avraham Avinu, our forefather Abraham, and Chana, the famous righteous matriarch later in history, in the time of the temple, who sacrificed 7 of her sons at the decree of a pagan king who was ruling over the land of Israel, who commanded them to bow down to idolatry, and they all refused. And according to this passage in the Talmud, this very beautiful and moving passage, Chana, The righteous Chana says to Abraham, you only bound one child, but I actually bound 7 sons on 7 different altars. And in thinking about it this way, the idea of the question, why was it really such a test? I think this is addressed by another important midrashic statement, which tells us that after the binding of Isaac, Avraham Avinu, Abraham, our forefather, said to the Holy One, blessed be he said, Master of the universe, it is revealed and known to you that I had what to say. In other words, when you gave me this command, I had what to answer you, but I didn't. I remained quiet. And this is an emphasis on this attribute of our forefather Avraham, which is actually considered to be the greatest element of this test and the indication of his character and how he really passed this test, that he did not question the attributes of God. And that's really the main thing that we learn from this, both for Avraham and for all of his descendants. It was a question of accepting the will of Hashem and not questioning his attributes, is the expression in Hebrew. You know, there is a famous story that I'd like to share with you about 2 Jews that were exiled to Siberia, and they were exiled to a work colony, and the conditions there were so harsh, and the weather was so freezing that if they didn't take care to watch over each other and work hard, they would have simply frozen to death. And their greatest fear was that one of them would die, and then who would take care of the other? So indeed, eventually one of these 2 men passed away, and the other gave him a proper burial, and then his entire obsession, his entire fear, every day he prayed to Hashem, what am I going to do if I die? No one is going to give me a proper Jewish burial because I'm all alone. And one night, the story goes, his great teacher, his rabbi, appeared to him in a dream. He was very angry at him, and he said to him, I can't believe that what you're praying for is that you should have a proper Jewish burial and that you should die as a Jew. Is that what I taught you? I taught you that you should want to live as a Jew. That every day your entire dream and your entire goal should be to live as a Jew, not to die as a Jew. And the story goes, with that he awoke, and that gave him enough inspiration, that was enough of a motivation for him to live through the rest of his sentence, and eventually he was able to leave, and he came home to Israel, and those were the words of his master, I told you to live as a Jew. So we think about this in the context of the awesome iconography of Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, which has become synonymous with our dedication and our sacrifice for Hashem. And here the idea is that we are commanded to follow Hashem's word to the end. And many times in history, as it was in the case with Hannah, we have made many altars and bound many children. And the goal is to live as a Jew and to want to live as a Jew. But the test that Avraham passed was never to question the attributes of God and to accept everything that he gives us. And that is the great heritage that he gave over to his children, to all his descendants, to all of Israel, to live as Jews and to realize that everything that God metes out to us in this world is part of his will, and really to want to live as Jews, to sanctify his name with the same spirit of sacrifice and selfless dedication with which Avraham bound Isaac. That's what he gave over to all of his children, to live as Jews.